Welcome to Human Risk, a podcast dedicated to the understanding of human behaviour as a risk. Here's your host, Christian Hunt.
Hello and welcome back to the Human Risk podcast. On this episode, I'm exploring compliance communication. Now that might sound like a very basic subject matter. After all, compliance is all about rules, and you might understandably conclude that the traditional approach to enforcing those rules of simply telling people what to do is more than adequate. But what about when those rules have a qualitative component, where people need to do things to a particular standard? For example, behave in an ethical manner, or where it's not possible to monitor what they're doing. In those cases, just telling people what to do is far less likely to work, as we risk only finding out once it's too late. So we need an alternative approach. And that's what my guest on this episode, Dr Bettina Palazzo, focuses on. She's a business ethics consultant who helps companies to improve their integrity culture and bring a fresh perspective to compliance and ethics. Or to put it another way, she helps people who are responsible for mitigating human risk to engage their audiences, what Bettina refers to in a compliance context as becoming compliance influencers. Now, I've known Bettina for some time, but let me tell you, she's a force of nature. She's both engaging, which is helpful given that's what she wants to help others to be, and insightful. So stand by to be engaged and informed by what she has to say. This episode was a lot of fun to record, and I think you'll find it fascinating. Before we begin, my regular reminder to you that my new book, Humanizing Rules, Bringing Behavioral Science to Ethics and Compliance, is available now. You'll find links to that in the show notes. With that said, on with this episode, and please enjoy, as I know you will, my conversation with Dr. Bettina Palazzo on compliance communication. Bettina, welcome to the Human Risk podcast.
I'm so happy to finally do this with you.
It's great to have you here. And look, you and I have known each other for some time, but for those listeners of mine that have never come across you, tell us a little bit about yourself.
Yes, I am in business ethics since a very long time. I started when terms like purpose or CSR or compliance did not really exist, at least in Germany. In the US, it was a little bit different. And I came across the topic just by chance because I was a desperate master student in American studies and I had no idea what you want to do with this. So somebody at Siemens, funny enough, asked me, well, why don't you write about business ethics in the US? We are kind of interested in this. So that was way before the scandal, of course. So I started that and I got hooked and I never basically stopped doing anything else after first I looked at it from an academic side and digged into all the deep questions of does it really mix business and ethics? And I went to the US to interview the most important academic players at the time. And fortunate enough, the field was ready that consulting firms looked into the topic. So I switched directly from my PhD studies to working at KPMG, which was end of the 90s and really, really, really hard pioneer work because, you had to explain everything from scratch. And I don't know about you, Christian, but if you ever try to explain business ethics to an accountant, that is not so easy.
Right.
And then I got abducted by my husband to Switzerland and we tried strategic management consulting for a while, but then I went back to my real passion and started my own consultancy. That's basically what I've been doing ever since with um, a relentless passion because I think the field developed really quite nicely and it was difficult and also fun for me to do this transition from this academic stuff, which is kind of useful, yeah, for your basics because you can categorize and systemize stuff much easier to really the nitty gritty what I'm doing now. So how we are talking about ethics, how do leaders need to behave, to be a role model because it's like this cloudy expression. Now you go and be a role model. Most of the time, people don't have a clue how to do it. So they need some help there. And, so that's what I'm doing at the moment. And my other most important passion project at the moment is how can compliance professionals communicate internally and also externally about their work and what they're doing and why they're important for the company and the success of the company, why they are not just a pain in the like many people see them. Yeah, so it's and so I was exploring where does it come from and what can you do about it.
Wow.
Yeah.
And I love that. And as people who haven't come across you before will detect, right? There's this real sense of fun in what you do. And one of the things I think is really interesting is if you looked at terms like ethics or compliance, right? These are really serious things, right? When ethical things go wrong, there are big issues. And it costs lives. It's a huge issue. And yet you approach it with this sort of enthusiasm and energy that is just infectious, which is why
Oh,
I've wanted to get you on the show for some time. But what I'm fascinated by is those aren't things that you naturally go, this is exciting and interesting. The average person, if you ask them about compliance and ethics, would go, that sounds a bit boring. Why do you find it so interesting? And where do you get your enthusiasm for it from?
uh, yes, then it's not even only boring. So it's this kind of lethal combination of boring and kind of scary. It's really not good for your branding. So that uh, so one of my more audacious claims is let's make ethics sexy. Because and so my why behind all of this, why I have so much fun in this, why I didn't get frustrated, because you can get frustrated along the
Right.
way,
Yeah, yeah,
right? If you
totally.
look at what's really going on in the world, is that like from my very first teenage jobs, I just saw how much suffering is going on at work, in offices, in factories. And I think that's really something that shouldn't be. Yeah, so it goes really deep. So why are we working? What's it all about? Do we is it like slaving away and just making a living, or doing something meaningful? And so the 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 other fun thing about being a consultant is that you get to look in all these kinds of different organizational contexts. So I've seen UN organizations and NGOs, and seen smaller companies of all kinds of industries, and you always see that if the ethics part is not handled with care, uh, people are unhappy, and it is, and that's why I think that's underestimated in the current discussion, that it's not just one pocket, the compliance pocket, so we need to take care of it, but it's pervasive. Pervasive. Yeah, it goes all in all kinds of aspects. So yeah, the ethics is always in everywhere. And yeah, it's often hidden under layers, and people have not are not used to talking about it, and if they talk about it, so the triggers when we talk about it are often if something bad has happened. So like, and it has also related to our experience in childhood, that when we first get across rules and punishment at worst. Yes, so that's why it's scary. It's deep in us that it's also related to a general fear of making mistakes and failure. And so if companies get their ethics stuff together, they get so much more out of it. They get more motivation, they get psychological safety, which is very hyped at the moment. And they also get innovation, because if I know I can't approach uncomfortable topics, I'm also not so open about unready ideas, which might be brilliant, but I just don't dare to bring them out.
And I think that point around we don't talk about this until it goes wrong,
Right.
I think is really, really interesting because I find it fascinating because you'd look at it and you'd say, we know that when you have something goes horrible, we want to try and avoid those things from happening, right? It's embarrassing, it costs money, it's a nightmare, and we don't feel good about ourselves. And yet we kind of ignore that. We're willfully blind to these things. And you
Yeah.
can see that. And I'm fascinated in particular. And I think given your background, Be interested in your views on that. If you look at Germany as a good example, and we could probably include Switzerland in this,
Hmm.
on the face of it, there's a lot of structures and processes in a very relatively compliant society. And yet recently we've had a ton of scandal. We can talk about Wirecard, we can talk about VW. So it's really interesting to me that you've got this sort of it's almost like we better not talk about that subject because it's difficult and awkward, and we've got structures in place that solve that problem. And yet we've
Hmm.
seen that some of these structures that we have in place and this unwillingness to talk can make the problem even bigger. So we know this intuitively, but for some reason there's a
Hmm.
challenge, there's a blockage there.
Yeah, so one general, I think, interculturally valid thing is that's very often related to shame. That's why, for instance, cybersecurity is a touchy issue because often people don't report it because, I mean, you did something stupid, you clicked on this freaking uh, phishing link, and it's so embarrassing to admit it, so they'd rather hide it. So that's the one thing that I think that's valid all over the world, that we have people are imperfect. Stupid things happen. People do stupid stuff, and then admitting it. That's also again that's related to psychological safety. Do I know I can tell this without fear? That yeah, and people tend to catastrophize about these things because they often the companies, and here is the connection to communication, they don't tell the right stories. They don't control the storytelling that's going on ethics in the company. It's the grapevine is always stronger than the official communication. So if let's talk about speak up. If I notice my colleague, I know my colleague addressed something difficult, something sensitive, and a few months later he leaves the company, I connect the dots in the way I want, and it's not necessarily the case that he was retaliated against for speaking up. Maybe there was something else. But if you don't control these stories, and if you don't tell stories about where it went well because people said something, well, I can't get this project because I would need to bribe, and I know it's safe and I will not lose my bonus or whatever, or my job. But usually these stories don't get communicated for all kinds of reason of confidentiality. But you need these kinds of stories. You need stories of people who spoke up, who then say, hey, and then I talked to my boss, or I called them, I used the whistleblowing system, and it helped me. Yeah. Oh, and Germany. Oh, I'm sorry. A link to Germany. Yeah.
Yeah, go for it.
The intercultural link. So what I think, and here actually my PhD was about the difference between German and US business ethics, where I looked at all kinds of theories that the Americans had and theories that the Germans had started. And one of the most important differences was that the US business ethicists always started with individual ethics, or character, and how do you decide, leadership, stuff like that. And the Germans, because with our history, we learned the hard way, we can't really count on individual ethics. We need to put it into the framework. So that's why the they are kind of outsourcing it, because we lost trust in individual ethics. That's why they're outsourcing it. But of course, in the real world, we'll need both. Yeah, somebody has to create the framework, somebody has to enforce the framework, and on the and that's something that compliance, especially if they have this very strong legal framework, don't understand that it's not enough to have the rule. You need to enforce it, and you need to know and find out what are the things that keep people from complying. Yeah, that's your topic basically, right? Human risk, and how you communicate about this, how you make people understand and find out. There's one important risk, that you communicate, you write this email about the new ABC policy, which nobody reads, and then they do the wrong stuff just because they didn't make the connection between the rather dry legalistic policy to their life. That's something that often people don't get.
This is why you and I get on and agree on a number of issues, right? Which is that is this human aspect of it, and thinking about not the way we'd like the world to be, right? Which is if I put this in a policy, they will read it, they will understand it, and they will love it. Right? And the bit I find interesting is that's just not what happens in the real world, right? And to your point, I thought your point on communication was a really good one. Is we never talk about these things, so people don't know. And I think if you look at any other context where we want human beings to change their behavior, where they want to buy a product, to try
Right.
something new, we spend a lot of time talking about the experience, right? Making it feel like it's not a risk. It's a good thing to do. So we will share. Like if I want you to buy my product, I will talk about the amazing reviews it's had, what other people think of it, right? And it's because we know that helps. I
Right.
feel much safer if I know lots of other people have bought this thing. I'm not going to look like an idiot. And I think it's really interesting when we look at something like whistleblowing, we sort of go, well, here's a whistleblowing hotline. You should use the hotline. And people go, what happens when I use the hotline?
Right.
Is this good? Can I trust these people? Is it a good experience? Or am I going to phone the hotline and be ignored? Are they going to shout at me? Am I going to have to fill in 5 million pieces of paper? Am I going to, is it going to be a horrible interview? Like I don't know. So I'm not going to do it. And so we don't think that logic that we know in other contexts, right? Make it feel comfortable, make it feel like the right thing. We don't do that in the whistleblowing thing. And so I agree with you. I find it really strange that people don't say, this is what happens when you contact. And here's to the extent that we can do that. You don't want to expose people who've
Right.
confidentially come forward, but there
Mm,
must be certain things that people have whistleblown about where they are happy to talk about it. So I discovered this and I reported it and something happened. A kind of
exactly.
customer journey. And I think it's fascinating that we don't see that.
Yeah, totally. I mean, the kind of tragic almost thing is that all these tools are out there. Yeah, we have design thinking. Why not look at the the client experience, at the employee journey of compliance? So, and then you can kind of think it through. What happens even before they start their job? Is compliance and ethics somewhere in the recruiting process? Do we talk about these things? Are we taking our reference checks seriously? I mean, that prevent a lot of problems, right? And then uh, how are we doing onboarding? It would be really crucial and a great sign from the beginning to say, hey, these are the expectations here. How this is how we want to deal with ethics and compliance, respect in the workplace. And I see that coming. I'm working with a German consultancy at the moment, and I am training all of their new hires every month in an onboarding workshop how to deal um, with boundary violations, how you can defend yourself in a good way, how can you also notice yourself if you overstep certain lines, how can you excuse yourself. So that would be a real good thing. And then you need, as you said, I don't want to look stupid because I'm involved with compliance. And we know this from, there's a great book by Noah Berger, Contagious Content. And he has a whole list of things to do if you want your content to go viral. I mean, we don't really aspire to become viral, but I did call my upcoming compliance communication online program the compliance influencer, just in the spirit that yes, it's all about influence and not in a way to manipulate, but in a way to influence in a positive way, to inform, make it attractive. Because one of the things that Noah Berger says that you have to create content that people want to share because it makes them look good. Sharing an ABC policy, not really, right?
it's but I've seen people. It's funny you say that. I've seen people do that, having like buttons underneath policies, and I'm like, what are you doing with that? So I saw it when there was one company. I saw they had that, and I'm like, what are you doing with that? And they were like, oh, it just came with the software. We don't know how to switch it off. I love this idea of like, what's your favorite policy? But for me, what's more interesting is what's your worst policy, right? So I was like, are you looking? Are people giving thumbs down to a particular policy? Right? You should track this, right? That's interesting. You should use
Yeah.
that engagement. And so on the one hand, it's a bit silly to have these things, but I love this idea of taking this thing that we all know, that we've seen. Stuff goes on social media, and sometimes it's ridiculous things, that idiotic things that
Yeah.
become very successful, and serious things that we think ought to go. But we've all had a real crash course in how to transmit things. And I think sometimes what happens is people go, well, that's social media, that's frivolous, or it's
Yeah.
advertising. And I can't do that with compliance or ethics because this is serious. And my view is the more serious the topic, the more you need to try and engage people, right? Because it's important, right? So
Right.
let's use every tool that we have. And so all of these kind of influencer tricks and things that we know make things go, why don't we try and deploy that for a good cause?
Yeah, and the good cause is the important thing. And I think one of the things why compliance professionals are reluctant to use this is that um, that they feel uncomfortable about selling. They choose their field on purpose because they're not the sales persons, and selling has also a bad rep in, well, in many areas of the population. But there is important work by Daniel Pink here, who says that want it or not, we all are in sales. We all have to convince somebody, and it's mostly not really about money, but about making people cooperate. And how can you win people's voluntary cooperation if you don't really have sanctioning power over them? That, I think that's really in a nutshell what compliance people need to do. And the mantra I came across here is, if you can't make something important interesting, it's your fault.
Right. And I think it's, what is interesting is I think there's an implicit presumption that, oh, because it's important, everybody will care. And
Right.
that's a very logical presumption. But we
Hmm.
know from other contexts, social media being one example of interesting, like serious news. If you look at journalism, serious news often doesn't make the headlines. It's the celebrity nonsense that drives headlines. And so we know that we have to make an effort. We can't assume that because the nature of the topic is important, that it'll
Mm.
go to the top of people's attention span. Right.
Yes, and here also comes in the fact that uh, if you are an expert in something, you quite easily are victim to the curse of knowledge, which means that you can't imagine anymore once you know something, especially if you know it very deeply, how it feels if you're not an expert. So that's why you're assuming many things. And we also know this from intercultural communication. So there are cultures that are high context, like Japan, where every little gesture has a meaning and you need to kind of have integrated this in your youth. Or you have low context cultures like typical US, where you have to kind of print out everything. Don't put your cat in the microwave oven, yeah, because
Right.
people come from all over the world. So you have to really start with the beginner's mind and explain things. And one good idea here is that you just imagine you need to you explain something to a 12-year-old. You can even do this on Chat GPT now. So if you put in your some policy rule, and then you can ask the tool to explain it like to a 12-year-old. So that might be a good idea to do, to check the understandability of your policies. There's also a cool thing, but that's, I think, only in German available. There is a whole institute for communication, and they have a tool where you can put in your text and they tell you how understandable it is. There's a real score for this.
Yeah, you can do that. Actually, tip, you can do that in Word. There's an index that you can access in one of the options. I'll put a link to both of those things in the
Oh
show
yeah, that's
notes.
good. Yeah, I think
Um,
it's about not using too many nouns, not enough verbs, and yeah, no examples, passive form, little tricks, that
and the thing I find really interesting is when we look at it, and this is why I'm fascinated by your bridge across from academia into what I'll crassly call the real world, right?
Yeah.
Is that we need the academic stuff to give us the grounding and the basis, and people have looked at this thing. But often academic things by default happen in laboratories, and whether that's a scientific laboratory or a sort of sociological laboratory, and that's interesting. That can inform things, but we then have to say, how do we take those findings and put that into action? And I think one of the things that people often miss is that translation piece. So we get a lot of things that happen in the compliance and ethics space that's theoretical. So
Yeah.
you talked earlier about training, and you get these sort of situations where people are presented with scenarios where the answer is really obvious,
Mm.
right? A sort of like don't kill anybody type training. And I always think it's silly because that's really lazy. Firstly, nobody needs to be told that, and if they do,
Right.
we've got bigger problems than the. But we deal with these sort of very ridiculous scenarios. We go, oh, we told them that, but that's not the bit that worries people. It's to your point. It's those awkward situations. It's the things where it's grey, where it's a
Right.
bit difficult, where maybe it's not a bit clear. I'm a bit confused. I'm in the moment. I've screwed up. A
Yeah.
lot of rules presuppose that you've never screwed up. And the moment you've crossed the line, it's like, well, you're on the wrong side of the law now. We all screw up in these things. And so I love
Exactly.
that what you're doing is really saying, let's focus on the human aspect of this and how can we help humans with real situations, not kind of train them on theoretical things that are probably never going to happen.
Yeah. So this one defining moment in my early career was when uh, we also worked with scenarios, uh, and there was this one scenario. So I know my company will have a merger with one of our competitors soon. Now my best friend asked me if she should buy some stocks of our company. What do I say? And people did not understand that this is the rule for insider trading, because the wording of the policy in the code of conduct against insider trading was this, this high level, if you stock relevant blah that,
Right.
that might influence, that should not be divulged. And it did not link, but when they saw the story, they understood, and then then you can explain. So this is said in the code here and there. Uh, So we underestimate the way people are able to no, we overestimate the people's capacity to link abstract legalese sentences with what they should do in a real situation. And then you add stress, performance pressure, peer pressure, and you have the perfect storm. Or obedience to authority.
I love that because you talked about, so compliance people don't want to do sales, right?
Yeah,
Because if they were really good at sales or felt that was their they'd be working in sales. And I think you can make the flip side argument of saying people that are in sales aren't interested in compliance, right? They're more interested in sales because that plays their talents. And so if we start to recognize these things, the first thing is let's try and learn from other disciplines. So you see what works in sales is useful in compliance, but also recognize that in the same way that you don't chime with their world, they're not going to recognize yours, right? I always say the average person isn't interested in compliance because if they were, they'd be working in compliance.
right.
What they're not interested in, there are a small number of people that are interested in breaking the rules and deliberately screwing. The average person just wants to do whatever it is their job is
Yeah.
in a way that is in compliance with the rules. Right? We don't go to work in most cases to deliberately screw up, and so we just need to make that link.
Yeah, so I think what we see on all kinds of ends in companies, that are people are way too much in their silos, and why not make a compliance training for your salespeople in cooperating with them? Yeah, so you need to make it about them, and I do get that it's difficult for compliance people, but because they have all these regulations that they just have to push into the organizations to check. Yeah, we did that, but but we know that doesn't really help. So why? And you, of course, you need to take some extra time, and it will take longer to develop a sales compliance training if you do it in a cooperative way. But at least then you know that you made it about them. Yeah, like the mantra of marketing is always, who is your target group? what are their problems, or what are their compliance problems, and they do have them, and they do want to avoid them. Yeah, except the ones that actively want to break them, which are the minority. And what is my solution to them? Yeah, so you need to show them, hey, if you do this and that, you will feel like this. You will know you won't have to repair stuff after you broke it because compliance learned about it, and you will waste even more time. Yeah, so and make it and avoid to only do it about the stick. You need some really nice carrots too.
And also in what you were talking about was this degree of realism, right? So you talked about where things start to get difficult. And so this training that you're doing with people is really to sort of say, let's equip you with a skill set and an awareness that is going to be useful in the real world. And I
Right,
love the way you were picking sort of implicitly saying, if I have screwed up, how do I get myself out of a particular situation? Because I think often the way that these things are presented is kind of, here's the rule. And
right,
the moment you've crossed the line, right, you are a criminal and you have screwed up. And I take the view that, there are certain rules where it's kind of like murder. I kind of, that's an obvious one, but there's lots of other sort of ethical, moral things, or just even just being offensive to people. We can accidentally say something
right,
either we did, like, we wish we hadn't said it. And we go,
right.
or we've inadvertently offended someone. Very easy
Yeah,
to do in a global, diverse organization. And so
exactly.
helping people back from that, not sort of going, well, you're now on the wrong side of the rules, I'm gonna slam you with everything that's there. But how do we kind of climb down from those situations?
Exactly.
I
So,
think it's really interesting.
what instantly came to my mind when you talked about this was um, Asterix and Obelix. Have you read these?
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
In Egypt, where the slaves have to throw themselves in front of Nofretete, and beg her not to be thrown to the crocodiles. So this is, I think, and it comes from our uh, traditional hierarchical organization, where this is more or less what we have in our bones. But what might happen if we screw up and we have to admit it, that we'll be thrown to the crocodiles. And this is what we want to avoid. Um, and that's and exactly, I completely agree with you. I'm also getting frustrated increasingly with policies and codes of conduct that they always pretend. So first of all, the rule is often quite clear to people that you shouldn't bribe, you shouldn't insult your employees, you shouldn't pressure public officials, and but the real gray areas can be difficult. So and here is where I'm left alone in the dark, because it is. What do I say to this supplier of mine who's also I'm very friendly with, and he suddenly shows up with this huge bottle of champagne? So what I'm suggesting here is that why not supply your people with ethics scripting? So what can I say in this moment? Because we train people on in sales what to say if the client says no. So why not train them what to do and say and how to say it in these kind of situations? And so I'm very interested in all these kinds of tools that we learn from marketing, also objection handling. What do I say if I'm in the elevator as a compliance person and I meet somebody who says, "Oh, compliance, it's really high," so they're complaining. So, uh, and we know from sales that you there is a whole routine for this. So you just repeat what they're saying with a question mark, and then you shut up and let them talk more, and you switch into curiosity. So get curious, not furious. And because this is can be valuable information for you to tweak your training, for instance, or tweak your process, because you want to know from your people how this lands in the real world.
I was thinking as you were talking, I remember, you read sort of, if, for example, there's an expense policy that says you can only spend this much when you're entertaining, and there's this sort of implicit idea that, well, if something goes wrong, you must phone compliance immediately. Like, you're at dinner with a client, right? And what they want you to do is stop things, right? Stop the proceedings, right? And go and phone somebody. Step outside the restaurant, go and phone someone who may or may not be available, right?
Right,
To ask for the next. And I just think it's like, it's so ridiculous. We need to think about things that are likely to happen
right.
we'd have to think about every single scenario, but when we showcase what we mean with the rules, when we talk to people about them and we make it alive, let's find situations that are genuinely challenging, that people will recognize, that it's useful, helpful advice, as opposed to, well, I told you that in this sort of abstract theory, we've given you this abstract, you should
Right.
have known that that meant this. And by the way, I blame regulators for this as well, right? They're not helpful either in the way they craft
No,
regulation. But it's really just recognizing that at the end of all of these things is a human who has to deal with real world situations. And so, how do we help those people to think about actual real world situations as opposed to, well, here's some theoretical crap they taught me in the classroom. I don't know how that relates to my work, so I'm just going to do what I think.
exactly. So what often happens, I think, that compliance, they have all these regulations and then they kind of trying to divulge them in the organization without making the extra look to asking them, so what are your situations? So this is the law. Tell me, has this ever happened to you? If you would need to act according to the law, what would help you to actually do it? What are your risks there? Yeah, so that's this kind of collaboration, because we all hate having, if somebody wants to push rules on you, and this comes from, it's very enlightening. We can learn a lot from transactional theory there, which is a psychological theory that says that we always communicate either in parent ego, adult ego, or child ego. And if the communication works, then we need the other side need to be okay with being in child mode when somebody talks to you in parent mode. Because otherwise, if you talk to somebody and if you're talking rules, the other person easily thinks, oh, this person thinks I'm a child, but I'm an adult. So, and if you have teenagers at home, you know what happens if you talk to somebody in parent child mode and they think they're adult. It's resistance and conflict, big time, and that's what often happens. So you need to talk to them as adults, have this openness, as you said. I think that's really brilliant. That they know they can recognize red flags, so you can give them the red flags there, but they probably have their own red flags because they are out there. So you want to know about their red flags, and then together. So it just, and I think the simple step of going to the different departments, having a short workshop where you simplify the rules you're trying to get across and show them some scenarios how you imagine it to be. And with the scenarios, that's very important that you give them the stories, because if you just ask them, tell me about your ethical problems in your job, nobody remembers anything. Yeah. Yeah, yeah. I've done this a lot of time with the stories. But if you open it like this with a story where there is no clear solution, then it's hard to stop them, in my experience. Then everybody, finally, I can talk, because it is a heavy load if you don't talk about these things. They are always there, but you have to create this safe space so people can talk about them openly and see, yes, this also happens to my fantastic, brilliant colleague, and he or she doesn't know what to do. Yeah, I mean, if you have the impression that everybody else has their act together and they're perfect, that's not the scenario to come across that you messed up. That's why it's also important for leadership to share their dilemmas from the very top.
You really got me thinking there, because I love this idea of let's have a discussion, because people love giving advice, right? Particularly men love it. Giving advising people, mansplaining or whatever to the situations. And you reminded me of something I saw online recently that I thought was brilliant, which I think is bang on point. And they said, if you ever want to get help from people, put a question out there and then log in with a different account and give a really bad answer. And what you'll find is that the question that people didn't want to answer, magically, if someone else has said something stupid, everyone else will jump in. So you put this fake answer that's not a good answer, it's a terrible answer, right? And everybody, suddenly the question that was sort of a bit
Ah.
boring becomes interesting. And I thought, I'm like, I love the psychology of doing that, because I think what you're pointing towards is this natural, we've got human attributes like curiosity, and how we want to engage with other people. And so all of this stuff is really around saying, let's recognize what those are, how they work. And if we start to recognize those things, we can start to design processes that use that to our advantage. So how do we grab people's attention? How do we get them to remember things? How do we get them to take us seriously? All of that. How do we build a relationship with them? All of these skills come from that basic human interaction piece. And so I think for me, and that's why I go on and on about behavioral science, as let's understand what people actually do.
Yeah.
And then we can use that not in a manipulative, as you say, not in a manipulative kind
Right.
of sense, but in a positive sense of building stronger relationships with people, working with them and delivering. And I think that is exactly what we do, as you point out, with customers. So we need to do the same, pull those same tricks in a positive sense with employees, and we're in a different place.
Yeah. Yeah. So my current metaphor, and I know you're also big into analogies and metaphors. My current metaphor for the job of compliance is there are basically like the people who need to take care of safety and security at a party with teenagers on a sugar high. That have attention problems due to constant use of social media. So yeah, that's what you're up against. And I know that's a really really tough job, but there are certain tricks how you can still do it. So you need to appeal to their better self. You need to show them what's in it for them. You need to make it about them. Yeah, and make the connection to their life world. Yeah.
One of the things that I love that you do is you've taken a real world thing, right, which I'll loosely describe as the coffee morning, right, or the coffee break, and you run these compliance coffees. Tell us about those, because I love the idea.
Oh yeah.
I'm guessing it comes out of the virtual world where sort of we got used to having these sorts of interactions online. But tell us about that, because I just love the concept.
Yes, I have to. Just recently said to my husband that that's like about the best thing I ever invented is my compliance cappuccino club. And it happened quite naturally. I started my newsletter, and I did a a pilot with a club with some compliance people I know, and we like each other. So the idea was, let's just get together every 3 months, and I propose one topic like training completion, retaliation, all these things that keep compliance people up at night. And then we just take an hour, and I do some opening comments about what are the pain points, the challenges, some solutions I've seen about this. And then I just let everybody exchange. And I'm always amazed that it's magic that happens there, because uh, I think compliance people don't have enough of these safe spaces where they can exchange amongst each other. Many of them are a little bit isolated in their organization. And I also learned there are so many highly motivated and creative compliance people out there, and they have kind of come to my club, fortunately. And it's great because they learn a lot about what's going on with other, already the comfort of knowing you're not alone with these tricky problems, but also seeing what other people have come across to do is very inspiring and provides a lot of positive energy, like the idea of having this cappuccino that gets you through a tough morning.
Yeah. And I like this idea of sort of crowdsourcing
Right.
in essence, because and again, it makes sense in other contexts, right? How can we come up with a good idea? Well, let's get lots of people onto the problem and
Exactly.
see what's out there. And I think one of the things that points towards is that we often like to have simplified models of the world, right? So in the same way that we write rules that are black and white, we just sort of go, well, here's best practice. I'm not a fan of best practice because I sort of go, well, who defines that?
Right.
And how that's just what you have seen other people doing. Or if you're one of these consulting firms, it's like, here's the thing that we roll out to because we've sold this to lots of people. This is best practice. I'm like that might not be, it might not be best practice. And let's aspire to even better practice, right? We want to be the best that we can and want to constantly improve. And I think what's interesting is that crowdsourcing ideas, just hearing what other people are doing, both in the compliance context, but also in completely different scenarios, is a really interesting way of dealing with some of these problems, because these are not unique. Yes, the context is unique, but actually the nature of what we're trying to do, grapple with human to human interactions, with processes, with how do we, these are things that we can learn from other contexts. And so I love, one of the things I think is interesting is, whenever you talk to somebody in industry A, it's like, we start with a company. Our company is very unique. Yeah, it is. But in the same, our industry is very, yes, it is, but you're still employing people.
Yeah.
And so these challenges that you might think that company X over here has nothing to teach you because they're in a completely different industry. I would argue the opposite. I would go look in places, go hang out with people that you wouldn't normally meet, right? Go chat to people. Yes, of course, look at what's happening in your sector, but don't restrict yourself to what's going on there, because as we've seen with banking, right, there were lots of things happening. Lots of firms were doing really bad things. And so if you're just copying everybody else in your space, you're missing the opportunity to be innovative and to solve problems by different means. And so I love this idea that you sort of just bring, it's all about serendipity and opportunity to get fresh thinking into a space that often is lacking it.
Yeah, that's serendipity is totally my jam. And one of my, I think my advantage as being, I haven't studied business, so I had to explain all the ethics and business stuff to myself. So you have a different perspective, then you can explain it better to other people. And so bridging these different worlds is really my passion. So that's why I'm looking in all kinds of places, because many of the solutions that we would need for ethics and compliance, we find them in leadership studies, we find them in marketing and communication, behavioral economics, and so these narrow views, they don't help us in the real world. So mixing all of this together, I like that very much. And for the best practice, I mean, I saw horrible stuff like, and they call this best practice when they give the intern the task to copy and paste the codes of conduct of all the competitioners to come up with their own code of conduct. That's kind of best practice approach in its worst and most stupid way, right? Of course, you look at the codes of conduct of your competitors, but then, and this is why I think ethics is so important, because in one of my former most important bosses once said to me, and he was a theologian, was that ethics in essence is subversive thinking.
Oh, interesting.
And I think that's also one thing why businesses tend to be afraid of it, because you don't really want subversive thinking in your company, but today you need the subversive thinking.
And I love that the idea of like, okay, we need a code of conduct, right? Go get the intern to go see what everybody else has done, right? Basic copying. I was smiling because I was thinking about, you'll have this as well, right? Where you might work for a massive company and they treat you like you're a big company as a supplier. And so you ask, do you have a policy? Well, I've been asked for, what does human risks policy on blah, 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 blah. Now, I'm a company of one. So I don't have a ton of policies, because the only person that's going to read them is the person that would write them. But to get through this compliance process, this onboarding procurement process, right? So what do? I go find somewhere a template, and I might just see if somebody else has done it. Because I don't care, right? It's not going to change anything. And anybody that I have signed an attestation to that I do care, obviously I care massively, but I'm just trying to get through this particular process. So copying someone else's homework makes a lot of sense if you're not interested in the subject matter.
I know.
You're just doing it to get through. If you actually want this stuff to matter, and I would argue that a code of conduct is kind of important for for any organization of more than one person, like you probably need that code of conduct, then actually copying somebody else's stuff is illustrative of you don't care.
Right.
Well, you should write your own, right? Just come on, what do you want to put in there? And then maybe go say, well, what have we missed that other people have covered? So let's use that as, it's not the start point, right? It should be the kind of challenge piece and saying, why have they got that in there? Do we need that? Do we not? But if you just start with how can I copy someone else, it is literally copying someone else's homework. And we know that the only time we copy other people's homework is when we can't really be bothered or it's an emergency situation.
Yeah.
And if your company's code of conduct is based around an emergency response to sort of that you know that you use to get out of other problems, it's not a great start.
Yeah, there's often yeah, a kind of naiveness about, do you say a naiveness or naivety?
Naivety, yeah.
Naivety about
I prefer naiveness though. That's cooler.
naiveness is also not the
Let's go with that.
um, about what is a code of conduct, what should it do, what kind of results can I expect, and if I approach it with this kind of spirit, we just have this piece of paper, and then magically people will comply with these dry rules. I don't know where it comes from. How can anybody think this? But that's on the other hand, of course, it's you need something written because you need something formal that proves that this is the rule. But they need to be helpful. These rules, are they really helpful? Often not. So, and one test also for me for codes of conduct is, are they really specific to the risk areas of that company? If you are in flavors and aromas, then you need to have something about intellectual property in there because you're dealing with all kinds of formulations of your client, and you might have competitors amongst your clients. And how do you keep this safe if you don't have really good instructions about client data as a telecommunication company? Then that's another good code of conduct. And as you said before, then you often hear this, but we are very special. That's actually just code for I don't want to look at my issues.
But I think you remind me of that game that you can play, right? Where you pull like a sort of statement of values or something,
Oh yeah,
and you say, well, which company is this? And they all look the same. And it's like, if you can't associate it with a particular thing, right, then it is just generic crap.
yeah. Integrity, teamwork, open communication, excellence, client orientation.
Maybe you shift the order around, right? From
Yeah. Then that's and the thing is, then they make a big fuss about it. If there should be 5 or 8 or 3 values and how you formulate them.
I find it's really funny though, because you sort of like, as you say, it's sort of excellence. It's almost to say, right, just in case you're in any doubt, we want to do really good work. I'm like, for me, that's a start point. And I love it when you talk about induction training. I love it when you get these sort of induction training things where you join a company and it's like all you care about on your first day is like, where's the coffee machine? Have I made a stupid mistake? How do I get, what time can I leave? Right. Is this a good idea? And you get all this sort of stuff like, we are a very ethical company. And I just was thinking, I'm not, the first question I've got when I walk into a company I've just decided to join is this an ethical organization? Because I can work that out for myself. I will work that out based on the real world interactions that I see.
It's true.
A little bit like, you can tell me how amazing your washing powder is. I will judge that when I wash some clothes, not based on you telling me that that's the way it is. And so the idea that I bombarded with these messages, we're a very ethical company. Why are you telling me that? And then actually my cynical brain goes, oh, have they got a problem? Are they telling that because they've had all sorts of issues? And I find it fascinating that we sort of, we almost think like, if you write it down, and there's some companies that chisel it into the wall, put these values there, and then they will become that reality will appear because we've magically written these words down. And I think that it's, I mean, we laugh about it, right? But it's so common.
It is.
And I
it
think
is.
it's interesting
Yeah.
when we think about cultures, and we're very good as humans. We're told something is one way, and then we go and experience it ourselves, right? If we didn't do that, you wouldn't need to travel, right? You just really should read a guidebook. And you just go, okay, I now know what it's like to go to Colombia because I've read a book about it. It's not the same as going to reality. So we know that we need to compare what we're told about something, and we then go and experience it for ourselves, and we make our own mind up about it. We decide. And I think there's something really human about that, of sort of experience, discovering things for ourselves. We're curious, naturally curious. We want to know what's going on in the world.
Yeah.
And so if you are framing something that is just not the reality that's there, far from convincing people, you get the opposite. You get this
Right.
kind of, we laugh about companies, we laugh about politicians who claim to be incredibly intelligent and they're clearly idiots, or that come out with absolute bullshit And we laugh about that, and and so I think if you're in a company, you got to be thinking about, like, what other concept. People are cynical, people are asking questions, people. So we've got to be thinking about: is this honest? Is this transparent? Is this human?
Think that we haven't really learned well how to deal with this, and so that's why uh, companies react according to the script that they have. So they kind of understood, okay, yeah, values are important. How do we do this? And the default is we give it to communication and to our advertising agency. And advertising agency are all about spinning reality and not having a dialogue about the dark side of reality. And that's why you end up with these weird things like I once worked with a bank, and they had serious problems. One of their top managers was in jail. So they rolled out a new code of conduct and gave the rollout communication to their usual agency. And what they did, they put the code of conduct into a box together with a candy bar with a, it Rittersport, and it comes in all kinds of colors and flavors. And then the blue one is dark chocolate. I don't remember all the other flavors. And what happened then was that people got excited about the chocolate, and they were switching flavors and colors amongst each other, and nobody talked about the content of the code of conduct and why this was necessary. Yeah, so this is why we need to be careful with this. Yes, we want to make it lighter. We want to make it attractive and interesting, but don't just throw some sugar on some bitter stuff. Yeah, because it doesn't land well. Yeah, so that it's not rocket science, but you have to. And that they did that before they worked with me, unfortunately.
Yeah, yeah. Just so we're clear, that wasn't your idea. You're not promoting this is a good idea.
No. No, and yeah, that's it is difficult. So we've all seen the usual gadgets that companies try to use, like compasses for ethics. I don't want to see compasses for ethics anymore. Please, please. I mean, we can come up. You can use your PR ads company, but then you need to explain them better. What's it all about? Or you need to get at least one compliance person on the team to do this in a good way.
And I was thinking, you reminded me of some of those sort of communication efforts where you get sort of like nice image, and then you get something like compliance is everyone's business.
Oh yeah,
Or we are all risk managers. And I'm like, lovely. What do you want me to do with that?
exactly.
Right. Lovely. Very good. And I'm like, you read it and go, I don't know what that means. I have no clue what that means. And people go, job done. Great communication thing. It doesn't change anything. And the other one I laugh about is mouse mats. What happened? A mouse mat sits underneath your mouse.
Yeah. Those screensavers. It's all very awkward to try to bring the message across. And of course, it's everybody's job. It's well meant. We understand that, but what does it mean to the janitor? What does it mean to an HR person? It's completely different ball game. So, mm, yeah. So that's why you need to get your leadership on board, give them some tools to have this talk with their people to see. So I know this happened to me. How about you? Did you know what to do? You can always come to me, and it will happen. It will work like this. I know how, as a leader, I know how to react if somebody comes with ethical concerns to me. I'm not brushing it off. I take time for it. I know to say thank you and not become defensive. So it's really in one conversation at a time where the ethics of an organization happens. And usually people are left alone with this. You have some rare cases where they are naturals, but they are extremely rare. And plus, today it's becoming more and more difficult because personal boundaries and respect is so different from a Gen Zer to a boomer to whatever country you are operating with. So you need to show people, so what are the red flags to look out, to watch out for, have some basic rules how to communicate well on ethics, because it's not so it's not part of the usual management education, but it should be.
Wow. I think that's a great note, Bettina. You and I could keep talking
Yeah, I
forever. We've done
know.
it before. We know this. So before I let you go, tell my listeners how they can get hold of you and join your cappuccino gangs and all these other amazing things that you're doing. How can people
No,
find you?
yes, it's easy. It's on my website. It's Bettina Palazzo in one word. So Bettina is with 2T and Palazzo is one L and 2Z.com. There you also have a pop-up that leads to my cappuccino club. I have it in German and English now. And my landing page for my compliance influencer program, it's compliance/influencer.com.
Amazing. And of course, as per usual, all of those things will be in the show notes. So for people that didn't have a pen, can't remember all those things, just have a look in the show notes. There are links to those there. Bettina, it's always a pleasure to speak to you. I love it. And so thank you so much for all the conversations we've had, all the times we've spent together, but particularly thank you for being a great guest on the show.
Thank you very much. You're so inspiring with all your questions for me as well.
So that's it for this episode of the Human Risk Podcast. My enormous thanks to Bettina for appearing and to you for listening. To find out more about Bettina, her work, her compliance influencer course, and some of the other things that we talked about on the show, have a look in the show notes. There are links to those there. You'll also find links to my book, Humanizing Rules, Bringing Behavioral Science to Ethics and Compliance. If this is your first time listening to the Human Risk Podcast, welcome. You can subscribe wherever you get your quality audio content. It's available on all of the major podcasting platforms. If you've missed any of the previous episodes, then do visit humanriskpodcast.com and you can catch up with those there. I'll be back very soon with another episode of this show, but in the meantime, stay safe. Remember, if you're in compliance, you're also in the business of influencing people, and thank you so much for listening.